Hi, this is Rabbi Ari Goldstein, and to my left, of course, is Paul Schatzberg. Many of you have met Paul here at the temple before or heard him share some of his stories in the past, and they really are extraordinary and rich and beautiful. And I'm here to simply ask him more questions and learn a little bit more. So, Paul, thank you so much for being here with us. And Paul grew up in Vienna, Austria, and that's so much of the story that I want to hear is what life was like for you in Austria and growing up Jewish. The point of this conversation is for us to hear your Jewish story. So tell us a little bit about stuff in Austria. What was life like for you in Austria growing up Jewishly? Tell me a little about it.
Well, I was born in Vienna, May 31st, 1928. I grew up, we had a large apartment in an apartment building, which included a live-in maid. There was a room for her in the kitchen, next to the kitchen. My father had a retail shoe store on one of the main streets in Vienna. And I remember him telling me proudly at the time that Paulette Goddard, the actress, came into his store and bought several pairs of shoes. He specialized in ladies' high-heeled shoes. My mother was at home most of the time. Occasionally, she would help out in the store on the very busy days, but she was at home most of the time. The maid helped a lot in the kitchen. My mother did the more complicated cooking. And I started going to public school, which was within walking distance. And, I remember going to classes at the school when I was old enough to remember the fifth grade and fourth grade and sixth grade and so on. And I was introduced to the experience of anti-Semitism early.
What was the name? What school did you go to? What was the name of your school?
It was a Volksschule, a people's school on the corner of Copernicus and Corneliusgasse. And there were about 7 Jewish boys in the class. The rest were almost all Catholic. Once a week, a priest would come and give religious instruction, and the Jewish boys were excused. And we would either play outside, or a lady would come from the temple and give us instructions in Aleph Bet. So from the beginning, we already knew that we were separate and different. In the class, we did say the morning prayer, Our Father who art in heaven, and the Jewish boys were allowed to be silent. We just stood. We were aware of anti-Semitic remarks from our classmates. And I remember one time, the principal of the school required one of the Catholic boys to apologize to the class because he had called one of our classmates a Jew pig. That's the German word is Saujud. It means Jew pig.
Wait, so hold on one second. So what's interesting about this is, at least as I'm hearing it, is that there was a sense of right and wrong. I mean, the teachers made the kids apologize, and and while we're at it, they had a separate, religious experience for the Jews. You may have felt separate, but they treated you respectfully. Is that correct?
Well, the teachers certainly did. These teachers we were the same to all the teachers. The anti-Semitic remarks as a result of that one experience I told you about, where the principal actually made one of the boys apologize. And the interesting thing, it became very interesting historically in March 1938, when the Germans marched into Austria, and we had the Anschluss, that is the connection, the in which Austria became a part of Germany. The classes, the schools were closed for about a week during this transition, and when the classes opened, we went back to our school, and now the anti-Semitic remarks became more ominous, because the boys would say, "Now we know what we'll do with the Jews." A week after we had resumed our classes, the teacher announced that from henceforth, all the Jewish boys would go to a separate school for Jewish children. I remember clearly the class bursting out into a loud, sustained cheer. And I remembering the teacher getting red in his face and banging on the desk for order. I have to assume that he was red in his face because not only he was angry, but he was also ashamed. The teacher and the principal were what in those days were the Social Democrats, belonged to the Social Democratic Party. The other party that was very strong in Vienna at the time was the Social Christian Party, which of course didn't have any Jewish representatives there. We went to the school. My brother was 2 years younger, so he and I both went to that school in a different part of town, much further away, and we had to walk a longer distance. And from time to time, boys would come to the school when it was let out, and they would throw stones at us, and the teacher would go out and told them to leave us alone.
Wow.
I would just lower my head for the back streets to get home.
Wow.
In question?
Yeah, I was curious. It sounds to me like, in so many ways and in so many cases, so that it's not like the event of the Nazis coming into Austria or Vienna would have made a huge change in thinking. Clearly, it was that all of these feelings of anti-Semitism were always inside people, but they were just given permission to come out now that the Nazis had invaded Austria.
That's quite correct. It was always there, and I have studied the matter. Austria was then, and still is, a Catholic country, and a part of the Catholic country that was on the conservative side of Catholicism. So that when Vatican II, presided over by John the 23rd, made a number of changes in the text, in the canon. One of the main changes they made in the canon was they removed the statement that the Jews are deicides, murderers of God.
Right.
That was removed. However, the conservative side of the Catholic Church was not in favor of these changes, including the church in Austria. Now, in August 1938, a woman came to my father's store, accompanied by two brown shirts. They were not the SS; that was the SA, another form of the Nazis, the German Nazis, the Austrian Nazis. And she showed my father a piece of paper, and the store was no longer his. And this is part of the takeover of all assets of the Jews in Vienna. At the time, that was very large. It was about $1 billion in those days. And my father was required to sign a document that he was transferring the business to this woman who was a member of the Nazi Party. So I still remember him coming home at the time, and he was kept on for a little while on some kind of salary to help show the woman how to run the business. But it meant that we no longer had an income.
Do you remember, do you know the name of that family?
Of the woman who came? Yes, I do remember it. I have it in my file.
Wow.
I don't remember it offhand, but I have what I did many years later. I was able to get from the Austrian State Archive the complete file of this particular transfer of assets from my father's business. And it included information, letters back and forth that continued long after we had left Vienna. And I got the whole file.
Letters between your father and this woman, or other ones?
Well, yes, it was about this woman who complained because the Austrian Nazis made her pay for the business that she received control over. By the way, at the end of the war, we got information that the store was still there, but had only wooden shoes available.
So she had ruined the business.
Well, the circumstances were the war. Vienna was bombed pretty heavily during the war. And then, of course, when the Russian army came in, that was very rough on the Viennese, and especially was rough on the Viennese women. So at that time, we were still allowed to take with us all of our belongings. But I have to go back a moment. My father's younger brother, Uncle Max, was also in Vienna, but he didn't do very well. He was not as hardworking as my father, and he often came to my father for money. One time, he asked my father for money so he could buy a special suit. What do you call that? I can't think of the word right now.
Tuxedo?
A tuxedo. And my father thought that was ridiculous. So instead, he bought him a steamship ticket for the United States. And my uncle, his younger brother, took a boat, and in the 1920s, he arrived, and somehow he was in Baltimore. And I have a census from that time, from around 1930 and 1940, that showed where he was living in Baltimore. So we needed an affidavit, and we needed permission to come to the United States. However, my father was born in Poland, and the Polish quota was oversubscribed because many Polish Jews came to the United States in the 1890s and 1900s. However, my mother, brother, and I were born in Austria, and so we would have been able to come. So the question was what to do. My father had a first cousin in Antwerp. It was a Jewish German family that had left Germany in the 1930s and went to Antwerp. So we got permission on a transit visa to go to Antwerp. And we did this in March 1939. I have to back up again because I'm thinking of something else. We were allowed to take all of our furniture, all of our clothes, kitchen utensils, everything we take with us through the United States, except gold and jewelry. My father had a paper bag, his gold watch.
Wait, hold on.
Still have.
Hold on. You broke up for a second. Your father, you said, had a paper bag?
He had our jewelry which we would not have been allowed to take with us in a
Right.
paper bag.
Paperback. Okay.
And on the day when the men came to move our furniture, there was an official, a Nazi official there, to make sure that nothing was taken that wasn't allowed. So I was in the children's room, and there was a valise, a leather valise, all full of children's toys. And my father came in with the official and said, "Look, these are all children's toys in here." The official said, "Okay, close it up and take it with you." And he turned his back on my father and started going direction jewelry into the valise with kids' toys, closed it up, picked it up, and did as he was told, and it got its way. It went in with all the rest of the stuff. And when we opened it up in Baltimore years later, it was still there, including my mother's rings, my father's gold watch, which I still have. Okay, so we left Vienna in March 1939 to go to Antwerp. We went by train and then by plane, and we landed in Antwerp, and my father's cousin and family were there to receive us. We ended up, after a few days with them, we ended up in an apartment in Antwerp, 147 Van Schoonbekkerstraat, in an apartment. And we lived there, and we lived there from March 1939 until December 1939. There was an organization in Antwerp called Ezra, which is Hebrew for help. And it was particularly there to help refugees as they were moving all over Europe to get out of the way. And my father would go there from time to time. He would take the two boys to get free haircuts and to get a tub bath, because in our apartment we did not have a bathroom. We had a kitchen with a wood stove, and my mother did the cooking and the baking, and the cleaning of the children and my father took place in the warm kitchen, but without a bathtub. The toilet was outside, so we had to go outside to use the toilet in the courtyard. So we stayed and we waited and we waited. And in the fall of 1939, my mother enrolled us in the local public school. Now, this was an interesting experience for me because the language was Flemish, which was very similar to Dutch. And I didn't understand it very well. Fortunately, our teacher, a man, was fluent in German, and that helped. And so I was in this class, and there were other
Wait, hold on
things.
1 second. So you've been in Antwerp now for 3 or 4 months. Is that true?
Yes, yes.
And you spoke Austrian and German.
We spoke German, and the Flemish was very similar to Dutch.
Got it.
And although I did not understand because of the accent, the class textbooks were written in Flemish, which was very similar to Dutch, which is similar to German. So I could figure out a lot of things. And then there was geography, and there was singing, and there was art, and so on. So I got along pretty well. A lot of the kids in my class came from an orphanage, and they did not have regular bathing facilities. So once a week or once every 2 weeks, all the boys were taken to a public shower. I was afraid that they would see my circumcision and would identify me. And I asked my mother to write a note to the teacher that I wasn't feeling well. Fortunately, the teacher understood the secondary significance of being excused, and I was indeed excused.
So you think the teacher understood why you were trying to excuse yourself?
Yes, yes, yes. He was a very compassionate teacher, And so I learned a number of things, and I still have in my possession a workbook that I did, all kinds of things that kids do in elementary school, and I was able to write in Flemish at that time. I didn't remember very much of it years later because I didn't use it. So I don't know how we managed, who paid the rent, and how these things happened. My uncle was in Baltimore and would occasionally send $5 to my father, and that was fine. But we never went hungry. My mother, of course, did everything: the sewing, the cooking, the washing, the laundry, and so on. My father, who grew up in an Orthodox family where men don't do things, don't do any of that kind of work. So apparently he was advised that he should send us ahead because we had permission to go. So in December 39, we went with my father to the town of Ostend, which is on the English Channel. And my mother was, when we said goodbye, my mother was very upset because as a woman in those days, she was very much dependent on the husband. Not only that, she didn't know any English, and she had two little boys. So we said goodbye, and we went on a ferry that took us across the channel to Folkestone. For me, this was an adventure. I was at that time 11, and I went all over the ship, and I enjoyed everything. Of course, there were other refugees on the ship, so when we got to Folkestone, we were all kind of herded together onto a train, and the train went into London, and we were sent into a hotel, and we stayed there for about a week. London was in total blackout.
Hold on. Well, let me ask you a question real quickly. So, how much of this story that you're telling right now are your some of the parts about Vienna, you said, I remember this with such clarity, but how many of the stories are total memories of yours, and how many of them are memories with your parents kind of sharing stories with you? This is what happened, that's what happened. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's hard for me to remember so many things from when I was 9 and 10 years old.
I understand your question. Fortunately, and I'm very grateful, I have a very good memory. So what I'm telling you is all from my recollection.
Wow, gotcha.
In fact, my recollection deepened because I've written it all down.
Right.
So we were in London, and my brother was 2 years younger, so he was 9, I was 11. She let me walk outside. I walked outside. It was pitch dark at night, and during the day I could see the dirigibles that were above London to prevent bombers from coming in low to drop bombs. This was in December 1939. Several months later was the German Blitz bombing attack, and we were already out of harm's way. So after about a week at this hotel, we were again herded into a train and driven to Liverpool, which is on the western side of England, and we boarded a ship. The ship was the RMS Lancastria. And the ship left and made its way across the Atlantic. We took the northernmost route because, as I found out, that was the way of keeping as much out of the way of German U-boats. It was, after all, a British ship. The ship was painted black, and of course everything was dark. Inside, when you went outside at night, you had to go through a curtain so there wouldn't be any light. Again, I was now 11 and a half. It was an adventure. I went all over the deck. I went down into the machinery room and saw everything going on. And I even learned an English song, My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean, because they were singing it. And we were in second class, which was quite comfortable. The three of us had a cabin to ourselves. There were 3 good meals a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, with a menu. So we had enough food, and it was fine. There was a gun on the after deck, and we watched the crew practice with the gun in case it was necessary.
Wait, hold on one
However,
second. So let's pause.
yes,
So your story, it's extraordinary, and we're going to come back to this. But let's go back to Vienna / Antwerp for a minute. Tell me about what did you? I know that you learned the alphabet when you went to school. You said they sent you. You got to do your own alphabet stuff when they were doing other stuff with the Christian students. Do you also remember being part of a synagogue in Vienna or in Antwerp?
yes. In fact, it's a good question. I remember specifically going with my grandfather, Michael Schor, my maternal grandfather, and going to Sukkot festival. I remember that specifically. I also remember going to my parents' temple. It was called the Schmalzhof Temple on the high holidays, and I would sit with my father, and way up in the balcony would be my mother and my grandmother, and I would wave to them. And we had regular services, and I was familiar with it. However, I have to now tell you what happened next. In November 1938, which was the time of Kristallnacht, at that time I was walking to school. I was now in the 5th grade. It was an all Jewish boys' school, and my walking through the school usually took me past the temple where we would go. I would usually walk on the opposite side of the street. On the day of Kristallnacht, I was walking by myself, sometimes with my schoolmates, but this time I was walking by myself. And I was just on the opposite side of the temple when I saw Boy Scouts in Boy Scout uniforms, directed by 2 adults, throwing rocks at the windows and breaking the windows and climbing over the wrought iron fence.
Wow.
I realized what was going on, and I was afraid to stop and watch so they wouldn't notice me. So I lowered my head and went back to school. That day, all synagogues in Vienna, except one, were burned to the ground, and the Torah scrolls desecrated.
Why was one saved? Why not? Why except one?
The reason that one was not burned down was because the fire department said there are too many houses close to it. They'll all catch fire, so you can't do that. That's why it was saved.
Is that synagogue still standing by chance? Do you know?
It was when I visited Vienna in the 1970s and 1980s. It was still there.
Wow.
In fact, it had a record, and I went through the record, and it showed the date recording my parents' marriage on July 25th, 1920 something.
Wow. And what about in your house? Do you remember like doing Shabbat in your house? Do you remember holidays in your house, or was it all at the synagogue?
Well, we did not keep a kosher house in spite of both of my parents growing up in kosher homes. So when my grandmother would come for a visit, she would only drink a glass of water. She wouldn't take anything else.
Oh my God.
So we therefore, it was only occasionally that we did have a candle lighting ceremony, and I remember that was in a special dining room which we didn't use most of the time. So now, where are we now? We're now on the Royal
We can go back. Right,
Yeah,
getting
go
back
ahead.
on the ship and going to America.
Yeah, okay. So we're going the northern route. It was cold and windy, but I was up on the deck and I was down in the machinery room, and it was an adventure for me. We made landfall in Nova Scotia, No one was allowed to know when we would arrive in New York because that was a secret. But once we were in Nova Scotia, my mother could send a telegram to Uncle Max, her brother-in-law, telling him when we would arrive in New York, in Manhattan. So we arrived there a few days later. My Uncle Max was there with his brother-in-law, Nathan Felsenberg, who was an attorney and who had a car. So all our luggage came down from the ship, and we spent one night in New York, and then we got in the car and drove to Baltimore.
So the furniture that you had brought with you from Vienna to Antwerp stayed in Antwerp, I presume?
No, the furniture didn't go to Antwerp. The furniture went directly to the United States and
Oh,
was put in storage in Baltimore.
I see.
Because my Uncle Max was there.
I see.
So by January 1940, we were in Baltimore out of harm's way, and my father was still waiting in Antwerp for permission to come to the U.S. Unfortunately, however, in May 1940, the German army attacked Holland, Antwerp, and Luxembourg. And all foreign nationals had to register, and that included my father. And even his passport was a German passport, and it had the swastika on it. But many of the people said, "Look, we're Jews. We got away from there. Never mind. You have to register." And so my father and all the others were put on a train to southern France, to a detention camp called Saint-Cyprien. That was the name of the place. Saint-Cyprien was a detention camp that the French had built to hold refugees from the Spanish Civil War years earlier. Saint-Cyprien was on the Mediterranean. It was at high tide, it was half afloat. The conditions were terrible. There was no medical help, and dysentery set in. So if you got dysentery, you were finished. My father escaped from there, as did others. The way you do that is you dig in the sand right by the fence, and you dig and dig and dig until you can wiggle under the fence and get out. The guards were French equatorial soldiers. They didn't care as long as you didn't do it in front of them.
Wait, say that again. French equatorial. What's that mean?
Equatorial,
Oh,
the French equator,
oh,
the
I see.
French colony.
Gotcha.
In French equatorial soldiers didn't care as long as you didn't do it in front of them. So my father was able to dig in the sand under the fence and get out, and he was able to find shelter with a distant family that had a home on the outskirts of Marseille. He went there, they could shelter him, but they couldn't give him much to eat because everything was rationed. In the summer of 1940, I was standing next to my mother in Baltimore, and she was opening a letter postmarked in New York. So apparently somebody mailed it for my father. Inside the letter was toilet paper with pencil writing on it. It was from my father. He wrote and told my mother where he was. He said, "I have no papers. I have no money. Please help me." She immediately sent $5 in the mail to that address in southern France. Remember, the southern half of France was not occupied by the Germans. It was the Vichy government. $5 would go a long way. It was
Although the
against
Vichy
most.
government was supportive of the Nazis, weren't they?
Yes,
I
yes.
see.
They had an agreement with the Germans that if the SS identified anyone in southern France that they wanted, they would give them up. So there were a lot of people hiding in southern France, including Thomas Mann and his brother Goloman, and a well-known harpsichordist, Wanda Zandowski, and a number of other significant people who were trying to get out of the country. So my father had gone to this family, so my mother got this letter and sent him some money. Then, and I was 12, and my English was pretty good. She and I went to downtown Baltimore to the office of our representative in Congress, and I did most talking and urged him to help my father come to the U.S.
What was the name of the congressman?
I don't remember it.
Don't worry.
I looked it up once, but I don't remember it.
Okay.
So then it was my father arrived in October 1941, just a couple months before December 7th, when everything would have shut down. So he was able to get to us and was saved. We had all of our furniture. A lot of it we still have today. And some of the rugs are here. My brother has some of the furniture where he's staying at Sunrise Assisted Living. And one huge piece of furniture is with my granddaughter Serena in Virginia Beach. Because when we couldn't take all that, there was too much furniture to take with us. We had all this furniture in Vienna in our apartment. So, okay, so we came to Baltimore, and I went. Then I took a competitive exam for a scholarship, and I got the highest score, and I was given a 4-year scholarship to what was then called Western Maryland College. Today it's called McDaniel College.
All right, hold on one second. So at this point, you're 18 years old, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so that means over the last 6 years, you've been living in America. Some of the first few years without your father, the remaining few years with your father, correct?
That's right.
And at this point, you've already also watched the Holocaust begin and end.
Yes, but I was still very young, and so I didn't research into the details of it until much later.
I understand. But do you remember how your parents, how do I put it, how they managed thinking about back home and what they had missed or what they had narrowly escaped, or do you remember anything?
I don't remember them talking about it. I just don't remember that.
It's okay. And do you remember anything about what being Jewish was like for you at that point when you were 16, 15, 14?
In Baltimore?
Yeah, in Baltimore.
Well, in Baltimore, I became a Boy Scout, and our Boy Scout troop met in the basement of Temple, Boy Scout troop. I remember when my father joined us, he wanted to join a temple. So I knew where the nearest temple was. It was very old-fashioned with a whole row of stairs leading up with big double doors. And I went with my father, and he went up the stairs to the doors. There was a service underway, and suddenly he turned around and went back down the steps. He didn't want to participate. Why? He heard an organ playing. Oi Gewalt. An organ he associated with Christianity.
Right.
But we know better now.
Yeah. What's interesting though is that clearly if he was looking for a synagogue, whether or not he decided to stay, clearly if he was looking for a synagogue, it meant that he hadn't lost a sense of faith and he
Oh
hadn't
no,
lost
no.
he
He
wasn't
still had.
disconnected.
So we did join a synagogue um, further up in another street, and we would go there regularly, especially on the high holidays. And so definitely remember that. And they were always usually Orthodox, and I still remember the Kohanim giving the blessing during the high services, where they spread their hands like that and they put their towels over their head. And I still remember being told, if you look at them, you'll get sick. And if you look at them a second time, you'll go blind. And then if you look at them a third time, you'll die.
Oh my God.
And I couldn't figure out how I could look at them a third time, because at the second time I would go blind.
Good point.
The thoughts of a kid, the thoughts of a teenager, and so on. I spent 4 years pretty much in residence in Westminster, Maryland, at Western Maryland College. For my bar mitzvah, and I got it. And so I took a chemistry course in high school, and at Western Maryland College, I majored in chemistry. So I was very busy with lots of lab work and lots of studying, and I had to take biology and algebra and trigonometry and calculus. And so I was very busy. I was in the Reserve Officers Training Corps. That was required of all male students. and after some of my classmates went to the full term of 4 years going to Reserve Officers Training Corps, and when they graduated, they got a second lieutenant's commission and went off to Korea, and some of them that I know personally did not come back.
Oh.
In fact, a lot of the guys I knew at Western Maryland College have died. And I remember going for the 50th reunion, 50 years after I graduated. Let's see, I graduated in 1951. 50 years later, we had a homecoming and a service for those who have passed. And for each of them, a lily was put in a vase. And at the end, the vase was full. A lot of guys I knew died. Most of them died of heart attacks. Those were the days when heart attacks would go to all the men. So, all right, so I graduated from Western Maryland College, and I got a job in Annapolis at the Navy lab as a chemist. I stayed there, but then the draft board caught up with me. They had given me allowances for going to college, and in fact, I even went to Duke University for 2 years and got a master's degree in chemistry. But then I was drafted. Never mind that I was 26 years old. I was married and one child already.
Wait a minute. Where did you meet and when did you marry Toby?
Okay. I met Toby at Western Maryland College. She graduated a year after me. She actually dated my roommate, and that's how I got to know her. And so about a year later, we connected again, and then we were married in December 1952.
Where did you guys get married?
We got married in Baltimore under a chuppah with a rabbi. I've forgotten his name.
It's okay.
But we have it written down somewhere. And then we went to New York for our honeymoon. And then we went back to Duke University, and I finished my 2 years and got a master's in chemistry. And let me see. Wait a minute. I got something backwards. I was drafted after I got my master's in chemistry. So now I was in basic training, and after basic training was over, I was in the chemical corps because of all my chemistry training. So they sent me to Pine Bluff Arsenal in Arkansas. Pine Bluff Arsenal. So we went there I was married. We had one child already.
What was your kid's name?
When we were in Arkansas.
What was your child's name? What's your child's name?
Well, the first one was Sharon.
Sharon.
She was the one who was killed in an automobile accident.
I remember.
The second one was Eric. He was born in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. He is now chair of the Department of History and Social Studies at Georgia Tech Institute. And the third one, Janet, she was born when we were back in Baltimore. So 2 years in the Army, we did research on all kinds of stuff like colored smoke grenades. It was really a waste of time, but that's the way it was. And I got my 2 years of Army service done, and I was finished. So I went back to the Navy lab because they held my job for me there. And I continued working there and doing research and doing some very good fundamental research that was published in peer-reviewed journals. So I did pretty well there. Do you want to continue?
Yes, I have a question now. So tell me, because your life story is fascinating, but I keep trying to shift this to Jewish stuff. So tell me about Jewish stuff in your family. Did you guys connect with the synagogue when the kids were younger?
There was a synagogue. It was the Reformed synagogue. It was in the building before the building we have now. And
so you were connected with Temple Beth Shalom.
Temple Beth Shalom. I've forgotten the rabbi's name at the time.
Clinton.
Yes, that's it. That's right. And so we had services there, particularly mostly high holiday services, and on other occasions like Sukkot. And I attended there, but not regularly.
Why not? I'm not judging you. I'm just asking. Like, what's
okay? Yeah, I wasn't. My wife is not interested in any respect in organized religion, so she wasn't beating the drums about Shabbat, lighting Shabbat candles.
Right. Have you told her how disorganized I am? She would love me. She would love me. I'm a very disorganized person. Okay. She may not like organized religion. She might like my type, which is very disorganized.
Yeah. Okay. So let's see.
So you didn't do like Jewish stuff in the house either?
No, we didn't. And in fact, for a while, I was involved in the Unitarian Church in Annapolis. There were a lot of ex-Jews that were there, and they were called, the Unitarian Church was the Unitarian Universalist Church of Annapolis, and those Jews who were there, because they liked the liberal environment, were called UU Jews.
Why, though? One second. But what inspired you to go to the church was because it's not like that was something interesting to Toby. She didn't like organized religion at all.
That's right. But my wife originally introduced me to the Unitarian Church.
I see.
She went to a Unitarian church in Baltimore.
I see.
And so I also went there, and I got pretty much involved, and in the Sunday services. For a number of years, I was active in the Unitarian Church. Now, something happened, and I became interested in the Temple Beth Shalom in Arnold.
Right.
I don't know exactly the mechanism of how this happened. When I did become interested, I felt much more comfortable being there than being in the Unitarian Church. Something that was Jewish in me, that was sort of built in Jewishness. I don't know how to explain it.
Yeah.
I was much more comfortable in coming to Temple Beth Shalom, meeting you and meeting some of the other people, and then joining and so on.
It's really kind of remarkable, but was because I don't think there's such a big Jesus presence in the Unitarian Church, but still there must have
No,
been
not at
some.
all. They're not in support of the Trinity.
Oh, I
That's
see.
why they're called Unitarians.
I see. Well, it's so, but also your background in Jewish customs and Hebrew and Bible studies. Again, they're not. You can be a Bible scholar or an archaeological scholar, historian, without being Jewish. But at the same
Yeah,
time,
that's
it's
true.
your
Yeah.
background is so rich. It's amazing.
Well, I have to tell you more. I also attended the St. John's College Graduate Institute.
Mhm.
I could do this while I was still working because I could do this part-time. And after about 7 years of attending, they gave me a master's degree, and it was a very, very good experience for the time there. I was I was exposed to about 1/3 of the normal 4-year college curriculum, and hopefully with a higher level of sophistication than the younger people who go to the college. So after I graduated from there, I was very interested in further studies. And this took me to Baltimore Hebrew University. And from then on, for over 10 years, I was a part-time graduate student at Baltimore Hebrew University. So there is when I really got into it, so to say, as we use in today's language, because we would spend a whole semester on the book of Genesis, reading the text, discussing it, writing a term paper, taking a final exam, and all that, and the book of Exodus. And then we didn't do Leviticus, but the book of Numbers, Bamidbar, and then Deuteronomy, and then Samuel, and so on. So I got, plus Jewish history, which included the Holocaust. And that's when I got my first dose, academic dose of the Holocaust. And so that made me academically Jewish. So in 1972, I decided to go to Vienna for a visit. And it was a bit rough because Toby had 3 children to take care of, and I would be gone for about 7 to 10 days. But we worked it out, and I went there, and I went to those places. And I went again in the 5, but this time I went with my children and my brother Walter.
Wait, hold on. Say that whole
And I
thing.
went
You
with,
broke up again. Go back 15 seconds and start over again. This time you went, finish.
in 2005, we went, I went to Vienna with my daughter Sharon, my son Eric, and my daughter Janet. They were all adults. And my brother Walter also. I wanted my kids to see where he and I ran around in Vienna, in the park, by the castle, and on the streets where we used to live. We went to the place where our apartment was. We were able to get in the wrought iron door and walk up to the 3rd floor. And I had my picture taken in front of the door that used to be our apartment.
Wait 1 second. How much younger is Walter? How much older are you than Walter?
2 1/4 years difference.
Does he have the same memories or lots of the same memories as you do, or does he have his own set of memories, or his memories not the same as yours? What's the
Well, we talked about a lot of that. Um, he he got a PhD from Johns Hopkins University in German literature and language. He taught for 6 years at Washington College, um, and then for about another 40 years at Clark University. He was head of the department. And so while he was in Clark University, we didn't see each other that much. But since he retired and is now in assisted living at Sunrise, we get to see each other regularly and talk on the phone. And since the improvement in everybody got vaccinated, I'm able to see him in person and have him over for dinner. And so we talk about the past.
and his memory?
Well, his recollection is not exactly like mine, but when we talk, we can match up certain experiences that we had while we were together as boys. But I am not using him as a source. I have my own very good memory, and I remember things very well. And when we were uh, in Vienna in 2005, uh, with my three children, we went all over the place, and where we stayed in the summers, and we went everywhere, and we even went to the museum, to the art history museum, and we had dinner there. They had a very interesting situation. You could have a multi-course dinner downstairs in the museum, and after each course, you got up and walked through the museum and looked at all the paintings. Then after the second course, you got up and walked and looked at all the paintings. And then after the dessert, you can again walk and look at the paintings. So it's a very good deal. Whether they still have that, I don't know, but it was a
We lost.
made copies
Oh,
of
there we go.
several of the paintings that we saw hanging up on the wall.
Very nice. So we've been talking for a while, so let me just finish up with one more question. Tell me about what it's like for you in terms of your Judaism now, in terms of who you are as a Jew, either at home or at a synagogue, what you like to do, what are your memories or your feelings. You're not a spring chicken anymore, Paul, but you're
No.
very active at the temple with all sorts of things. Tell me about Judaism for you now.
Well, my first thought to your question was that I'm an intellectual Jew in the sense that I I'm very interested in Jewish history, including tremendous amount of archaeology. I'm very interested in the text study that we have because we go through the text again and again very carefully. And I'm very interested in the text as much of the Hebrew that I can manage because it was written 2,000 plus years ago by people I don't know. I've never met 2,000 some years ago, and they're talking to me. They're sending me their stories, and it 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 it's in my blood to use a common term. And so, what was interesting is um, my grandson Simon, living in Madison, Wisconsin, where at that time Eric was at the University of Wisconsin, one day announced to his parents, "I want to be a serious Jew." Well, he was a kid. Okay, so he was maybe 12. He wanted to make bar mitzvah. All right. So Eric went to the nearby synagogue and they said, "Fine, we'll get him a teacher, but you have to join." So he joined. And he prepared for his bar mitzvah. And I remember we all went to his bar mitzvah. And the ceremony, the ritual, was as follows. The cantor would hand me the Torah, and I would hand the Torah to my son, and he would hand the Torah to his son, my grandson Simon. And then Simon, and then Eric, I would chant from a portion of the Torah. My son would chant from a portion of the Torah. And then my grandson would chant his portion of the Torah for his synagogue. He would give his Devar Torah, and he'd give his speech, and we had a wonderful celebration, and it was very, very memorable. And so I recall this and all the family was there, and they all participated, and then my daughter Sharon, her two kids, David and Rebecca, where were they? Well, they were in the Washington area. They both made bar and bat mitzvah, and we all attended that.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. Listen, Paul, this has been an absolutely extraordinary conversation. Your story is remarkable. I know there's so much more that you could have told too, but we're trying to keep it in a manageable amount. But still, the essence of your story you have truly told and done so beautifully. And I can't begin to tell you just how appreciative I am for you taking the time to talk to me, but also, obviously, with your permission, this is going to become public for people to watch. And I know that lots of people have been watching these interviews because they're interested, and I'm certain people are going to be interested in your story. So I hope it's okay for us to put this on our website.
Yes, I'm very grateful that you invited me to do this. I'm very glad we did this.
The gratitude is ours, and I just want to say thank you. I'm going to stop the recording in a moment, but just want to say thank you and tell you just what a beautiful story you have, and how touching and meaningful, and how important it is to hear your story as part really of our story.
Thank you.
All right.